and certainly a vivid interest in the world, comes from a foreign service family. Pretty effectively during the 2004 campaign hid the fact that he spoke fluent French, which could have turned a narrow defeat into a landslide loss. But I think the one interesting thing I've heard said about him is that different people react differently to losing the presidency. Now, that's a pretty hard loss. And especially in his case, at 6 o'clock on election night, the errant exit polls were projecting a big victory for him. So for 4 hours, he really thought he was going to be the President of the United States. But somehow, a lot of these people never put this behind them. I had a friend tell me that Senator McGovern, who carried only one state in the 72 election, was having serious conversations with people 40 years later talking about, well, if it hadn't been for this factor and that factor, I would have won. I mean, that sort of borders on delusional behavior. But anyway, Kerry really seems to have put this loss behind him and said, all right, I'm going to fashion a new life here in the Senate, and then maybe at some point become Secretary of State. So you certainly have a person with a lot of strengths moving into the job. You can't envy anyone having to succeed Hillary Clinton. I mean, she's a world stage figure. I mean, there just aren't a lot of people like her around. And so he's got a tough row. And the other thing that I mentioned is that increasingly, and it happens with every administration, no matter what they say during the campaign or when they come into office, is tighter and tighter control of both foreign policy and domestic policy come out of the White House and the various councils inside the White House and executive office system to try and, I mean, as the government grows bigger, as the policies become more complex, the effort grows to try and get a better control of them and not give as much autonomy to your cabinet officers as perhaps might be a good idea. I saw quoted someplace the other day that Kerry hoped to sort of follow in the tradition of Atchison and George Marshall. I think under the present structure, the way the government works, no matter what his skills and qualities, that's going to be a very hard thing to do.
Corollary question to that. Kerry is known for the Kerry-Lugar deal, certainly in certain parts of, the Indian continent. He could be considered by some, perhaps the Taliban, to be partisan to Pakistan. Is this going to present him a problem when it comes to finding solutions?
I don't think so. He also sponsored some major aid programs for Pakistan, and so I think of all the potential people in that job, he has as much confidence from the Pakistanis as anyone.
I mean, he has too much confidence, but as far as the Indians are concerned, he could be possibly considered to be partisan.
That's an interesting question, and I don't quite know the answer to that. I mean, the analogous situation is when Richard Holbrooke came into the State Department at the beginning of the Obama administration and was given the Afghanistan-Pakistan portfolio. He wanted to include India in that portfolio, and the Indians shut that down very quickly. I mean, as you know, it's one of the world's hardest problems, and there's so many other things that he's got to deal with. You've got the islands thing going on. You've got Iran, now North Korea. And if I have a concern about Kerry, is that he somehow thinks that with renewed effort he can resolve or at least ameliorate the Israeli-Palestinian and other Middle East issues. And I think of poor Warren Christopher wandering around the Middle East the first couple of years of his term, sitting for hours waiting for an appointment with Hafez al-Assad, and then sort of getting a few Delphic remarks from him and leaving, that he can just end up sort of like a dog chasing his tail, dealing with that issue when there's so many other front burner things going on. And of course, to talk about front burner things, one that Kerry's dealing with right now in Europe is trying to get some sort of cohesion and coherence into what the anti-Assad forces are going to do and what the Western world is going to do to assist them.
What's Kerry's track record with dealing with Russia?
I don't think a lot, really. And of course, that's another one of the second. I listed what I thought were the first 4 issues he's got to deal with, but Russia, Putin is on a particular track, and I don't know how far we're going to get with the Russians. I mean, they seem to want to cooperate on Iran, but they have their own reasons for that. But I don't know elsewhere.
From Straits Times. Just want to ask, are we then going to see in Obama's second term a fizzling out of the pivot, given that you said personality is important, and Kerry's focus is really Europe and the Middle East, and what is Asia to do with, the situation?
I can't give you an answer to that because literally I don't know, but I think it is one of the interesting questions out there as to can they keep this momentum going? Because there has been a lot of momentum built up in the... when I was in Bangkok, I talked to absolutely despairing Thai columnist who thought it was all going to come apart because Hillary was leaving. I don't think things come apart like that, but it's going to be tough.
Do you think she'll run
What?
for president?
Who, Kerry?
No.
Hillary.
That is the big guessing game of Washington, and you can. I mean, it's all speculation. I mean, I don't even think she knows, and certainly nobody beyond her head knows.
Not even Bill?
Given his role in her last campaign, he might be among the last to be informed of what. But I've heard people tell me that his health is going to be a factor in her decision. I mean, he looks great, but he's had some pretty serious heart problems. No, that in the Democratic field is frozen until she announces what she's going to do in maybe a year's time. She just signed a very lucrative speaking and writing deal. I think she desperately does want some rest. But then after all, she's a very dynamic person who's forged and broken a lot of paths in her lifetime. And just personally, because I have no more knowledge than anybody else, just wonder if the temptation of being the first female president of the United States is going to be too big a temptation to resist. But she's run a presidential campaign. She knows how awful and harrowing an experience that is. And as one of her close friends and advisors said, she's now at the very peak of her popularity. And the day she announces, the Gallup poll ratings go down, 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 and down, and she becomes the subject of all these attacks. I mean, it was amusing, were it not so Orwellian, that at some phase during the last election campaign, the Republicans were suddenly hailing Bill Clinton as the heroic model of a president. And I kept thinking, does anyone have any memory? They tried to impeach this guy just a few years ago. And so, I don't know. But as I said, the field is frozen until she makes a decision. You have Biden out there. I would think from the point of view of the Democrats, it's rather discouraging that their top two candidates are 70 years or older. Whereas the Republicans, despite all the divisions and all the problems and everything that they're having, they do have a field of younger, attractive candidates out there who are gaining good experience, particularly as governors, which is, I think, really the much better place to run for president from than the United States Senate. We've only had 2 U.S. senators elected president in the last 100 years or so. Well, 3. Warren Harding, hardly an example, JFK, and Obama, and all the rest have come, far more have been governors.
I was wondering about round 16 in Singapore next week. You said the low-hanging fruit has been kind of dealt with, but do you see then it headed for a round of stumbling blocks? Or what sort of possible breakthroughs?
You get 2 assessments of that. One is that it's getting bogged down in all these matters, which to me are pretty arcane. I don't consider myself a trade expert. But the other that I heard from somebody who was a key economic advisor to Obama in the first term is it's always darkest before there's a breakthrough. And it looks on the outside, from the outside, pretty dark. But maybe that means that they're on the verge of a breakthrough. Although I think the statement between Obama and Abe, I mean, this is the part of the world where one reads tea leaves, and there are a lot of tea leaves that can be read into that one. What kind of recognition of special rights and privileges does that entail? Is that, and if you grant to Japanese rice farmers, is that just opening the barn door to every other special interest all the way across Asia? The best line I've heard about the Japanese is what's really going to stimulate them into the TPP is if the South Koreans get interested. Then the Japanese will have no choice but to get involved. So that's about as far as, you'll know more in a couple of weeks.
Further questions? No further questions, and it leaves me to